Before we start, a few announcements. Firstly, I've developed a short survey that I'll talk about more at the end of the video, but it's designed to better reflect what you, as an audience, want to see from this series. Secondly, the Swag News team has been very fortunate to be sponsored this month by Arcade Unchained. Arcade Unchained is an MMORPG, which means all other games become irrelevant. Choose up to 220 class variations and live out your wildest fantasy of being an epic devil chat, highly religious cat girl, or a magic woman of color. The Arcade developers have done their best to set their game apart with having a fair monetization structure that relies on cosmetic items and a two-lane battle pass that viewers will find familiar if they've played any game in the last year. My character ended up being a handsome fellow called Norman, who's a cheery elf with the swift blade skill set, which predictably ended up becoming an archer, like every single Skyrim character ever made. Being an enormous game, players can occupy themselves with building homes and castles, finding polar bears in forested areas, admiring wheelchair accessible estates, playing Assassin's Creed Black Flag, reenacting the Vietnam War, and the age-old tradition of trying to fight enemies you're far too underleveled to defeat.
What? No!
Available on Steam through the link in the description. The phenomenon seemed to be worldwide. A new decade had been ushered in with a sense of hopeful optimism. Deep down, we all knew that this man-made milestone wouldn't be the answer to everything wrong with the world. It wouldn't stop us, as people, such a flawed species, from tearing ourselves apart, simply because we remain so focused on defending the spiteful, inhumane actions of the proud people who once stood in our place. It's no stretch to say that every single scrap of suffering in the world could be eradicated by the time the next significant milestone comes to pass, but instead of building toward a beautifully tailored world, the likes of which would make future generations honored to feel part of, we find ourselves foolishly obliged to stubbornly uphold the mistakes of the past. When it came to our collective facade of universal positivity, it just would have been nice for it to last more than 3 fucking days.
We begin tonight with the US and Iran on the brink.
Iran's military has launched, quote, tens of missiles at US forces in Iraq.
US troops stationed at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq are still on high alert.
This is a direct attack on a US military asset.
This is a conflict on an entirely different scale.
So, what the fuck is going on? Viewers probably saw the mention of the intense state of affairs between Iran and the United States at the start of the month, but like almost all things, the situation is complicated. I'd like to preface the following by saying that simply talking about the relationship between Iran and the United States will be almost impossible without some form of bias, but that is nevertheless the aim. This was the most complicated and longest story I've worked on to date, so strap yourself in for the long haul. Like any complex situation, let's start with a fun lesson in history. Those who don't really give a shit can skip to the time on screen now. The United States and Iran have a shaky relationship to say the least. In 1953, a CIA-backed coup led to a new government being installed, which was very receptive toward American interests. For the better part of the next 2 decades, the country saw unprecedented economic growth and rapid modernization, funded in large part to its bountiful oil facilities that were set up by foreign companies. By the 1970s, Iran had become the region's strongest military power, but opponents of the Iranian leadership argued that the rapid westernization of the country and the fact that 50% of oil revenue was going to foreign companies was not in the best interest of Iran. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution ushered in a new government, which took full control over oil production, banned Western influences, and abandoned its traditional monarchy for an Islamic republic. Iran and the United States were no longer friends. In 1979, 52 American diplomats were held hostage for 444 days in the US Embassy in Iran by a bunch of college students who stormed the front gate. The former exiled monarch was in the US at the time for cancer treatment, and the students, who were strong supporters of the new anti-American government, wanted to see him stand trial for crimes he was accused of committing during his reign. After a failed attempt by the United States military to rescue the hostages, they were eventually released in 1981. This kind of back and forth bullshit continued for the next several decades, with the United States selling weapons to Iraq after it went to war with Iran, an Iranian-backed terrorist group killing 17 Americans in a bombing, the US mistakenly shooting down an Iranian passenger jet, and the United States imposing crippling trade sanctions on the country. This is until 2015, when the United States, along with a handful of allied countries, struck a politically significant deal with Iran, which promised to drop a large number of nuclear-related economic sanctions in return for a sharp decrease in nuclear weapon research and uranium enrichment. This was honored by Iran up until 2018, when the current US government backed out of the deal, criticizing it for only restricting Iran's nuclear program for a handful of years. Naturally, Iran, and many of the prominent NATO members, who spent 2 years negotiating the deal, were fucking pissed, and supporters of the deal pointed to its initial success and how it could potentially be a model used for other hostile nuclear states, like North Korea. To critics, the deal was far from perfect, but it was still far better than no deal at all. Since the nuclear deal was abandoned, more damaging economic sanctions have been imposed on Iran by the United States, and the United States has accused Iran of attacking 2 oil tankers, blowing up a Saudi Arabian oil facility, and shooting down a US drone. Although, it's been contested whether or not the drone was within Iranian airspace. Last year also saw the United States government declare an entire branch of the Iranian military a terrorist organization that has killed a very sizable amount of American soldiers in Iraq. Once again, it is fucking impossible to summarize something so complicated without leaving out a multitude of details or without any bias, but the main takeaway is that both nations have so far been operating in various shades of grey. But now that we've covered the eventful history of the relationship of the two nations, we finally get to talk about what happened on the 3rd of January, 2020. In retaliation to an attack on US service members and military contractors, the US president staged an airstrike on Major General Qasem Soleimani, in which he and 10 others were killed. It's difficult to accurately determine the significance of Mr. Soleimani's death, as different sources offer a wide range of answers. To the United States, he was the head of a state-sponsored terrorist organization, and someone who they considered to be the second most powerful person in Iran. However, after speaking to an Iranian citizen, it seems that he was viewed very differently within the country. From the unnamed source that I spoke to, who was more than vocal about his disapproval of the Iranian government, it seemed as though the perception of Qasem Soleimani by the wider Iranian population is difficult for most Westerners to properly understand. To many, he was seen as a war hero, a figure made famous by state-run television, and a person who had a rockstar-like quality to the people of Iran. To his critics, he was a pillar of a brutal regime, the same regime that killed 1,500 protesters in November of last year. However, his respect among the people of Iran was able to cross deeply divided factional lines, and he was often respected even by Iranian citizens critical of the government. Regardless of whether he was considered a terrorist or a respected war hero, it's impossible to deny the impact of his death on Iran. Whether the assassination was justifiable has also been a topic of heated debate. The United States considered him head of a state-sponsored terrorist organization and had initially cited that he posed an imminent threat with a plot to bomb the US embassy in Baghdad. Whether this threat was real, fabricated, or misunderstood has also come into question, as specific details were changed over the days following the assassination, and neither members of Congress or United States Defense Secretary Mark Esper saw any intelligence which would indicate an immediate threat. If no danger can be found to justify the assassination, this would mean the attack had violated international law, something that is obviously less than ideal. for everyone involved. 5 days after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, Iran retaliated with a series of missile attacks on US bases in Iraq, which marked the first direct engagement between the two states since 1998. The attacks resulted in conflicting reports, with Iran claiming there were 80 US casualties, and the United States denying there was a single military injury. It was later found that 11 US troops were treated after showing concussion symptoms, which was later increased to 34 by time of writing. But after the attack, both countries seemed reluctant to escalate the situation any further. Iran was left without looking weak, and the United States saw no need for further retaliation if no US citizens were killed in the attacks. The tension between the two nations has seemed to cool off, but the aftermath of what happened is yet to be fully understood. Debate on whether the assassination violated US and international law is yet to conclude, let alone the Hague and Geneva Conventions. The frosty relationship between Iran and the United States is understandably much worse than before, with harsh sanctions yet again being imposed, and Iran reverting its commitments made to halting nuclear research and development. During the tense standoff, the Iranian military mistakenly shot down a passenger jet, killing all 176 people on board, cementing the unintended collateral damage of even the briefest of conflicts. Viewers are encouraged to make up their own mind when looking at the US-Iran crisis, but from what I've found, even on both sides of the conflict, the majority of citizens have become increasingly unwilling to support the actions of their own governments, if that means fostering further setbacks toward a peaceful, stable, and prosperous relationship that would benefit the ordinary citizens of all nations involved. Meanwhile, Holland officially rebrands itself as the Netherlands, and a prominent Italian crime family opens up applications for homosexual candidates. At the same time, a man is killed by an armed rooster, and a helicopter crash in California has left 10 people dead, including NBA legend Kobe Bryant. Over 10 cities in the Hubei province in China have been put under lockdown, as a deadly virus has so far claimed the lives of at least 130 people. The coronavirus has now infected over 6,000 patients in the region, which over 60 million residents make their home. This led the Chinese government to shut down public transport, departing flights, and even many roads leaving the province. However, this was not able to entirely contain the outbreak. Although drastic measures have been taken to contain the virus, many international experts have criticized the actions of the Chinese government, with some stating that the measures were too little too late, and others pointing out that Chinese officials have gained a reputation of downplaying health epidemics in the past. Reports of Chinese officials arresting citizens and reporters who spoke out about the virus on social media have sparked serious concerns, but not nearly as much as an anonymous nurse who claimed that the official number of infected has been extremely underestimated, with her approximating that at least 90,000 people have been infected. The World Health Organization has yet to declare an international emergency, but there have been confirmed cases in 19 other countries worldwide. As a side note, the video game, Plague Incorporated, has received a significant increase in sales since the outbreak. However, the developers have warned players not to use the game for legitimate information. At the same time, a British cutlery company has started selling square-tip knives, following a sharp increase in knife crime, while a Denver-based radio host, sick of covering the impeachment of the US president, wishes for what he describes as a nice school shooting. Kangaroo Land is still very much on fire, with over 6,500 buildings and over 30 people now having been lost to the flames, including 3 United States firefighters in a waterbombing plane crash. Over 10 million hectares have so far been burnt, which can be properly represented when put next to a landmass the size of the United Kingdom. An estimated billion native animals have been decimated by fire, leading to some experts predicting that it may take a century for some of these ecosystems to fully recover. The level of respect for the people who have been fighting fires and donating to fire relief cannot be understated to the people of Australia, with some perhaps less conventional methods taking the spotlight. The Prime Minister, on the other hand, could almost single-handedly put out the fires, with the ice-cold reception he's being given, with many in fire-stricken areas refusing to shake his hand. However, it's hard to really understand the almost warlike atmosphere of what it's like on the front lines of the fires, which is why I spoke to independent journalist Dean Fletcher, who believes that the fires often aren't captured properly in traditional media.
While they're saying, yeah, it's unprecedented, yeah, it's a disaster, you know, 1 billion animals have been wiped out, none of them really seem to capture the sense you get on the ground. And I don't know if that's just because of how classic media works, but when you're out there and when you're talking to these people, they're not going on about how scary the flames are or how, you know, bad the smoke is or whatever it may be, or, you know, their concerns about losing property. They're genuinely worried that they're not going to survive the decade because they can see that the fires have gotten a lot worse than anything they've ever seen before. Driving through some of these areas, you see the devastation on a scale it's unrecognizable, the way it's just dead. Everything is just gone, and there's this smell, and the only way I can describe it is it's the smell of death. There is more to this story than just, you know, the classic bits where you get a 30-second clip of someone telling the PM to fuck off.
You from the media, tell the Prime Minister to go and get Nelligan.
If you keep talking to them, they really start to open up about their concerns, their fears, the fact that they've lost faith in politics and to a certain extent lost faith in democracy.
Mr. Fletcher actually turned out to be quite the news story himself, as earlier in the month, he was arrested for attempting to host a party at the Prime Minister's house.
I did. I got arrested for trying to host a pool party at Scott Morrison's private home address. So the idea originally was to take advantage of the fact that his message to everyone facing the bushfires was to just ignore that and watch the cricket. So I thought, because I'd recently come across his private home address, pretty much it was a combination of the Daily Mail and Google Maps. That was how I confirmed the address. And so I threw that up onto a Facebook event, said pool party at ScoMo's. He just wants us to watch the cricket and have a good time. So let's get along, show up and have some fun. And so, you know, I was posting updates. I went up there wearing, you know, boardies, a singlet and a towel around the neck. And it was just that sort of good-hearted, larrikin kind of approach to a really shitty leader. And so, yeah, we rocked up. I was there with a mate and we were just sort of hitting the cans, sitting on his lawn. Half of the things that we did there were just for memes. I did the Simpsons thing, you know, hey, Mr. Prime Minister.
Hey, Mr. Prime Minister! Scotty!
Just, you know, having a good time. And then suddenly the neighbours had called the cops on us. 7 or 8 police cars showed up for just 2 people drinking on the lawn, and then one comes out and he's got 3 stars on his shoulder. I'm like, oh shit, we might actually be in trouble. Well, just so you know, yeah, you're both under arrest at this point. And I'm like, for what? And he's like, trespass. I'm like, we didn't even go inside. We were waiting for him to get here so we could, you know, fire up the barbecue, have a quick dip, and then watch the cricket. After all of that, he comes along and says that we trespassed because we'd gone slightly up the driveway because there's no fence there. And so we'd just gone up the driveway a bit to put our empties in his recycling because that's the responsible thing to do. At the end of the day, really, I feel like I was arrested for recycling, which is the most ScoMo thing to happen.
It's been seen throughout history that unfortunate and difficult circumstances bring communities together, and from my 56-minute-long conversation with Mr. Fletcher, I knew that it would be criminal to deny the world of this particular story.
When I was dropping off the first lot of donations to one of the RFS sheds, one of the SES guys came in from a call out, and he said that they were doing some traffic control and they'd set up on the corner of an intersection, and this guy comes past in a big black truck, winds down the window and says, "You guys are fucking legends, keep up the good work," and throws this bag at them. And it's like, it was a decent sized bag. He opened it up and it's just full of weed. And he's like, I mean, the locals are friendly, I'll give them that. If there's anything that captures the Australian spirit, it's definitely handing out, half a kilo of weed to, those hard workers on the front line.
The Australian bushfires have been called the country's most distressing time of crisis since World War II. Fire officials have pointed towards several cases of arson as to the cause of much of the bushfires. However, climate change-related factors have been blamed for the unprecedented severity of the flames.
People don't trust the government anymore. They don't trust the government to help them, to protect them, to represent them. I'm not saying that we need to start setting fire to the place. The government's taking care of that for us, but we definitely do need to change how we're addressing this.
At the same time, Russia tries to rewrite the history of World War II and weighs the positive and negative features of climate change, while China's undisputed leader, Winnie the Pooh, flips a shit over Taiwan's rejection of being ruled by the Chinese mainland. A report by global communication firm Edelman has released its yearly report on trust, which saw over 34,000 respondents from 28 countries voice their opinions on various established institutions. It was found that people from the most developed countries did not believe they would be better off in 5 years' time, while those in less developed economies tended to be far more optimistic. In general, people who were university educated, represented the top 25% of income, and had significant media consumption, tended to be much more trusting of established institutions than the 83% majority that didn't fall into this category. It was also found that over half of these surveyed believed that capitalism did more harm than good, with 83% worried about losing their job and 57% believing that the media they consume is contaminated with untrustworthy information. Viewers who want access to the entire report can find it in the comments with the rest of the sources. At the same time, an American veteran of the Vietnam and Iraq wars had his prosthetic leg repossessed by the Department of Veterans Affairs, Detroit's largest demolition contractor, fucks up, and officials for the 2020 Olympic Games assure athletes that the cardboard beds won't collapse during extracurricular activities, as they have a maximum load of 200 kilograms. This is despite former athletes far exceeding this weight by themselves. Meanwhile, SpaceX wants to offer their satellite broadband internet before the decade is out. The larger tech industry is being roasted for being highly unethical. YouTube provides ads on videos spreading misinformation, and a teenager working as an intern for NASA discovers a new planet that's said to be 6.9 times bigger than Earth. Nice. In entertainment, the Golden Globes were held at the start of the month, with an exhaustive list of awards voted by critics you've probably never heard of. The list is bigger than my ex-wife, but some of the standouts include 1917 winning Best Motion Picture Drama and Best Director, Joker, claiming Best Motion Picture Drama Actor and Best Original Score, Rocket Man, claiming Best Actor in the Musical or Comedy category, as well as Best Original Song, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, winning Best Motion Picture Musical and Comedy, Best Supporting Role, and Best Screenplay. Viewers who want to see the full list can refer to the comically large list of sources in the comments. The long-standing college humor website, best known for its YouTube channel, with over 13.5 million subscribers, has been pulled its funding by its parent company. Over 100 employees have been laid off, and only a skeleton crew of less than 10 remain. The decision came after the company kept failing to turn a profit on its content, and a few insiders to the industry have blamed Facebook's poor management and changes to their algorithm that have previously bankrupted content creation enterprises in the past. College Humor intends to shift their business model to better utilize its streaming service, which still has 6 months of content already produced. Moving on, The Witcher becomes one of the most viewed shows on Netflix of all time. Sony decides not to censor Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for Chinese audiences, and the voice of Apu from The Simpsons decides to stop voicing the character. We also get a bunch of trailers for Mobius, Birds of Prey, and Guns Akimbo, which viewers may recognize from this image that was first published on the 13th of May, 2018. In gaming, the very long-awaited Cyberpunk 2077 has had its release date pushed back from April to the 17th of September. The team have stated that although the game is currently complete and playable, the decision was made to further polish and improve what's already been made, and to better optimize current generation consoles, which have reportedly been struggling to keep up with the impressive scale. The team have also made it clear that the multiplayer portion of the game will likely take until at least 2022 before becoming available. CD Projekt Red has long held tremendous respect among video game enthusiasts, and many expect Cyberpunk to be a serious contender for Best Game for 2020. Ahead of the release of the VR exclusive Half-Life Alyx, Valve has made every Half-Life game available for free up until its release date in March of this year. Although, fans shouldn't expect a Half-Life 3 anytime soon, with Valve upholding its commitment to never count past the number 3. Perhaps the most exciting piece of news in the area of video games is the unveiling of Alienware's answer to the Nintendo Switch, what they call the UFO. Featuring an 8-inch display, detachable magnetic controllers, and the ability to dock into a larger monitor, the UFO has obviously borrowed its fundamental design philosophy from the flagship Nintendo console. However, there are a large list of differences. To start, the device is a fully functioning Windows 10 PC and allows a keyboard and mouse to be plugged in for traditional use, or as many might have guessed, any Windows compatible PC games. There is currently very limited information on the concept device, which isn't even confirmed to be pushed into production, but it's been said to have a 1200p screen, 10th generation Intel CPU, and a removable solid-state drive. Early reviewers were impressed with the performance of the machine, praising its design, comfort, and steady frame rate at what was estimated to be medium settings. Once again, there has been no indication of if and when the UFO will eventually be available to consumers, and no price points have subsequently been mentioned. At the same time, a new trailer for Doom Eternal was released. Physical games are still dying off. GTA 5 is now on the Xbox Game Pass. PlayStation will not be making an appearance at E3 2020, but have unveiled the official logo for the PS5. Truly ahead of its time. Meanwhile, presidential candidate Joe Biden calls video game developers little creeps who teach kids how to kill people. People pay $90 to see a fight last 40 seconds. SpaceX successfully tests its abort sequence, and Tom and Jerry have officially been crowned dankest meme of 2019. Announcement time. I struggle with this series a lot. A weekly video that I used to be able to make in around 2 or 3 days is now something I begin working on shortly after the previous episode is released. This, along with steadily rising Patreon supporters and YouTube seemingly recommending demonetized videos at the start of the year, means that potentially news can begin to evolve and become better than ever before. The biggest problem, however, seems to be that I have no fucking idea what you, as an audience, actually want. It has started to become feasible to hire freelancers to hopefully make the news more enjoyable than ever, but I find myself clueless on what would actually add any value. I could hire an editor to make the visuals more interesting, or a writer to help flesh out more stories. However, I don't know if they'll ultimately be appreciated, or if it will change the sense of simplicity that attracted many viewers in the first place. There are also other ideas, like hiring a voiceover, that I'm sure will be a very contentious decision, or just doing dumb shit, like commissioning an upbeat song about the Armenian genocide. There's also much to discuss about the format, which has obviously become much longer than before, and features stories that have become hugely more detailed than earlier episodes. In theory, with enough supporters or sponsors, it would even be possible to physically travel to locations, but the opportunity cost of doing so would need to be considered, and whether going halfway round the world for an interview would really improve the enjoyment of people watching. To restore my own sanity, and for the benefit of all of you as viewers, I've linked a short survey in the description, in an attempt to answer these questions. I'd like to thank Archage Unchained, and my very generous Patreon supporters, for making this series possible.
So close, no matter